And our lovely host, Red. Say hi.
Hello. Hello. I'm Red Jordan Aerobica. Buy a book. I need internet access. My gender identity, I'm a man.
I like the term genderqueer. I also like the term intergender. And I think it's fun to use the term virago from time to time.
As a little child, I went around to my mother's junior chamber of commerce party and told everyone there that I was not a little boy, I was a little girl. And I grabbed my baby photo of 2 years old and showed it to them and offered, I called it proof.
What's been explained to me as transgendered is this umbrella. And there are all these different terms that go under the umbrella. And I think in general, it's just hard to explain yourself. No one really gets it. Because there can be one trans guy who's like, okay, well, I'm transgendered, whereas I would probably more say I was transsexual, but I haven't had any, procedures done. And the experience is just, the experience under the transgendered umbrella is just so vast.
In terms of the communities that I identify with, there are many. First, I am a person of color. I am Chinese, an immigrant from Hong Kong. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I'm definitely a transgender woman, as well as a person living with HIV and AIDS.
My gender identity, I'm a man. For all that look at me, I am a man. But the real, if you dig down deep, being I'm a public figure is since I'm a transsexual, I've changed sex.
I don't have, ovaries or a uterus, but I identify with this internal sense of who I am, which is female. And at that particular time, there really was no transgender community. So community has it started off as being kind of like family, but with your family, you kind of outgrow it and you have to venture off and do your own thing. So that's kind of how I see community right now.
I didn't know that there was any sizable number of people in the trans community until I got to Honolulu. I was in the military at the time. And I got to Honolulu and I found out about the Mahu community. And I found out that it was large. I was kind of there at the beginning, I started taking estrogens after 3 years of therapy with a gender therapist. The therapy started in '81, and then I was very cautious, and I started my estrogen therapy in about '84. And at that particular time, there really was no transgender community. There were communities of, I would say, gender transgressing, sort of like trans sex workers. I believe at that time, I was not at all in contact with that community.
Well, I was fortunate that I live in the Bay Area. And so there is a ready-made trans, they're trans communities, really. I found, I had already known about FTMI, so I knew that there were meetings. I had just never been to one. I had known for years. And so I got myself to a meeting, and that was helpful. And I also started showing up to the FTM and Friends coffee social in San Francisco, and through that gathering, met a lot of people that I spend time with now. So there really was instant community, and I dibbled and dabbled in a few other of the communities in the Bay Area, as far as like genderqueer community and different kinds of trans communities. But I find that the majority of the people that I interact with are from FTMI and by extension, the Wednesday night coffee social.
The Mahu community in Honolulu was my first even knowledge that there were groups of people living their lives the way I wanted to live. Oh, I thought about it, but my only knowledge and ideas about it was that I'd have to do it entirely alone, without any support whatsoever.
I'm 63 years old, so I've come a long way from my original roots.
I'm Chinese, and my parents were from Shanghai and Canton. My mother actually was born and raised in Hong Kong. My father moved to Hong Kong from Shanghai when he was 6 years old.
I identify racially being mixed race. I'm 63 years old, so I've come a long way from my original roots. I was raised in the African American community, a light-skinned family in the African American community. In Chicago, it's very segregated, and I've been out in the world my whole life. And, I am literally mixed race. My mother's light-skinned black, my dad was from Honduras. So, and we came originally from a upper striving middle-class family. Everybody worked. I was the only child, and there was two grandparents, and my mother's parents, and my father's, and was working. So everybody was working. So I was definitely middle class, but I've been extremely poor for a very long time.
I transitioned in '75, and I did it the old way. You move to 2,500 miles away from home, and you just do it, and you call home, and you say, guess what? And so I sort of did that. But as I said, my family had disintegrated the day I left high school. I put myself through college, and I wasn't ready to tell anyone then. So I just worked my way through college and kept my head busy in books and in work and never looked up. And when I got out of college, I had to go into the military. It was the Vietnam War. So it really wasn't a choice. But since I had done college, I was a United States Air Force officer.
Well, on my mom's side, Sicilian Roman Catholic from Italy and New York. My mom was born in New York. And but I was raised by my dad, so I didn't spend a lot of time with my mom and my mom's family. And my dad's side of the family is Mexican and Swedish and Catholic, Mexican Roman Catholic. My father, I'm my dad's only child, and my dad didn't remarry after my parents divorced, so it was me and my dad, and so we were upper middle class.
Well, I was born in New York City, which is kind of a community in itself, with New Yorkers. And as I said, I was born to a Jewish family, Eastern European Jewish immigrants, and let's see. Other than that, I can't think of any other kinds of communities. I was kind of grew up in a community. I lived in a public housing project in the Bronx, and it was a community of children. There were 9, 11, 15-story apartment buildings all in a circle, and there were lots of kids around, and I kind of identified with the other kids.
Well, I know where I've come from, which is middle to upper middle class black family, heavily involved with Baptist churches. My mother's a minister, and my father's a deacon in his church. So a lot of my background has to do with, it was very religious.
Well, being raised in a Mexican family, all of the holidays were sort of Mexican. So we got together on Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter, but we ate paella and enchiladas and tamales. We got together for birthdays. There were 13 cousins. Practically every month we got together for a birthday, and we had piñatas. And we were such a large family that we met in public parks instead of people's homes. I was raised around Mexican soap operas and Mexican polka music. Yeah, in Los Angeles. I attended Spanish Mass on Saturday nights until I was about 13 years old.
I'm not in the same economic status anymore, but I tend to have people around me who are educated. I tend to have people around me who work hard and have a purpose outside of doing their job. There's something extra about them that just drives them to go on every day. And that's kind of the background that I grew up with.
At first, as a small child, 8, 9 years old, it didn't bother me at all that the thought of being a female was a very sweet, pleasant thought.
See here, in 1966, I believe it was, the city council of Honolulu required that anyone wearing clothing of the opposite sex had to have some kind of identification to say that what sex they were, or they would be found guilty of misdemeanor. And the police force in Honolulu was a rather rough one. And for the most part, they simply administered punishment on the spot in the form of a beating in an alleyway or something. So they didn't bother with filling out paper and hauling people to jail. They just took care of things on the spot. So this was within the 4 blocks of Hotel Street from there to there. You had to have your button on. If you were outside of that area, it didn't matter if you had a button or not. You were something bad would happen.
Like, I didn't even know the word transgendered. I didn't even know what transitioning was until I met my first trans guy probably in 96 when I was living in Santa Barbara, but for some reason something just didn't click.
I don't really know how I can interpret the word transgender. It had meant a lot of different things over time. If I look at the time before I transitioned and the whole process of me coming to the realization of being a woman, I would feel more comfortable with the word transsexual and the word transgender. Transgender had been a word adopted by many communities in the last 10, 15 years to be an umbrella term which encompass many different identities and communities, which include transsexuals, cross-dressers, gender variant individuals, even people who we consider to be gay, like the drag queens, are being described under this umbrella term. So it's really broad. It encompasses a lot of very diverse communities. So I think that's the unfortunate things. Once you kind of water down the definition of the word transgender, it really doesn't represent any particular communities at all.
I'm old, so when Harry Benjamin first wrote that book, I got it. I guess I was in my 20s or late, I can't remember, but I bought the book. I got my father to pay for that book called Sex Change or something. So I knew about Christine Joyce, and I knew what a transsexual was. The word transgender has just come about recently. It's just a whole new thing.
Well, I grew up in the 50s and early 60s, and there was zero awareness of anything known as transgendered or transsexual at that time. The first time I ever heard of transsexualism was when I was a teenager living in the suburbs of New York, and I saw an article about Christine Jorgensen in the newspaper because she was just coming out with her book. And that was the first time I ever heard of sex change or transsexualism. However, I will say this. When I did read that article, it sent shockwaves through me because I knew that since I was 6 or 7, I had this yearning, this kind of cherished private yearning to be a girl, instead of a boy. And at first, as a small child, 8, 9 years old, it didn't bother me at all that the thought of being a female was a very sweet, pleasant thought. But when I reached puberty, 12, 13, 14, and people started talking a lot about sexuality, I realized that my this wish to be female was not in harmony with the sexual identity that was all expected of me.
My sense of ownership in the trans community, I think I got the message really early on. At least my interpretation of what I was hearing is that I hadn't earned my stripes yet. Right. I've come from outside of the Bay Area, and so I have many years of teaching and training and speaking experience. I have 3 degrees. All of my studies were focused on trans topics. But since I wasn't a Bay Area person, I'm starting from scratch. I mean, I'm starting from lower in the ranks, and I think initially I was put off by that, and I believe there are remnants of it, but it's not specific to the local community. It's just in general that there are a lot of things I've done throughout my life, and I don't know who's watching, and sometimes I wish somebody would watch. Maybe attributes: resilience, courage, shame, anger, stress, great sense of humor. I mean, you have to. Really, please.
Specifically, transsexual people make incredible efforts in order to take their place as in society as members of their adopted gender. Struggling against their own physical structure many times. The issues of passing. In other words, passing is a weird word. I prefer to say the issues of being credible in one's adopted gender. And attaining that place of being regarded as a member of their adopted gender, and they have to be very resilient and courageous, oftentimes resourceful.
I'll tell you one thing we have in common. I think a lot of trans people, they could be really conservative and others could be real radical, but sometimes the conservatives are really raised to a boiling point when it comes to issues of transsexuality. They've been stepped upon. Their little identities have been squashed since they were 3 years old, and now they're mad about it. So they might be very conservative. I know guys that work for a police force. I know guys and women that are, the military and, total, like maybe, quite conservative, and they're not going to get up in arms and go boycott Safeway or something. But when it comes to they have been injured in the gender, their own gender definition by the world, and they're mad. A lot of them are mad about it. I think we all have that in common. Like you could go down the street and meet somebody totally different every single way, but some trans person's been bashed, and you can stand there and talk and really feel a camaraderie over that issue.
Granted, each individual is bringing in their own pre-transgendered past that still affects how we operate to this day. And yeah, there's a little cattiness and it's difficult to work with each other. But I think there's this feeling that if you're going to be brave enough to identify as such, then we need to support each other, because this is, a difficult thing.
Attributes: resilience, courage, shame, anger, stress, great sense of humor. I mean, you have to. Really, please.
Gender and sexualities are meant to be celebrated, not to be grieved.
Like, I find it fascinating that I could be in a situation where, you know, people are talking about trannies, and it's usually male to female, transgendered people that are around, and some little comment will come up, and I'm sitting there going, you have no clue who's in the room with you. You know, just because someone might be obvious, someone's in the, I would say, the women have a more difficult time passing, especially in the beginning of transition, that for someone to make a comment about them, I kind of have to like laugh and be like, this person has no clue who they're surrounded with. And that's kind of how I feel the transgender movement will like happen. Like, no one's really ever gonna know who's transgendered.
I think that we will be looking at more ways to empower ourselves, to celebrate the leadership, to celebrate the diversity, to celebrate our true self. In the last 40 years, we spent many years mourning and grieving what we didn't have or what we've lost. Mourning and grieving how we survived a very violent time in our community history. But because of all the progress we make, I think we will see more people feel empowered to talk about what leadership means, what diversity means, what celebrating themselves means, and gender and sexualities are meant to be celebrated, not to be grieved.
Transness is just integrated into society at every level, in every community, every sector, every, you know, in corporate America, in the schools and families. It just is. It's not even an issue. It's no issue at all.
I guess the whole notion of clocking tea will like disappear. But right now it's kind of fun because, you know, we're all in search of who's like us.